My timing for this video could be better given what's going on right now off the coast of Gaza, but here goes. It's a response to a particular video that has come out. Referring, or at least in terms of this video, I would like to refer to the question, the existential question of Israel. Israel is in a peculiar position in regard to most countries on earth, in that it is consistently the only country on earth that's expected to justify its own existence, which is kind of strange, since what we now know as Israel came into existence as a result of historical forces in the 1930s, 40s, I suppose, as well, probably more so the 40s, which is essentially the time period which saw the awakening of the forces which resulted in the existence of most of the countries in the world. Almost all the countries of Africa and a large number of the countries of Asia and the Middle East and the Caribbean came into existence at the same time or later than Israel came into existence. And they often came into existence with equally violent birth pangs. Say Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, only after a long, brutal war against the French. Indonesia, an equally long and brutal war against the Dutch, where generally people are now sort of say, all right, these countries had the right to insurrect against their colonial masters. But when you look at other countries, like India versus Pakistan, where they were originally British India, and when they separated, they had what can only be described as a Holocaust, where 1 million people died as a result of an ethnic cleansing or an ethnic conflict, which saw the redistribution or annihilation of entire communities of Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims on the Indian subcontinent, when quote-unquote Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan were born. So if Israel has to make a case for its own existence, one could say that so does any other country that's been born since Israel's inception. But we don't expect India to argue for its own existence. We don't expect Uganda or Algeria or Jamaica to say that it has to make a case for its own existence. So I think it's a bit disingenuous, and I would say even disruptive or potentially dangerous, to infer that Israel has to make a case for its own existence, because that the law of unintended consequences then militates to a position where just about every country on earth will have to justify its own existence, either ethnically, ethno-linguistically, or socially, culturally. Look at me, I'm a Canadian, but my ancestors actually were from Europe, obviously, and we can see by looking at me, do I have the right to call myself a Canadian? When we criticize Israel's existence, or its right to exist, we're just sort of placing the bar at a different position than we would for, say, Canada. We'll say that, okay, large number of Israelis are descendant of migrants that arrived after the Second World War or just prior to it, whereas the same thing can be said about the population of my country, Canada. The overwhelming majority of the people that live here are either migrants or the descendants of migrants that come here. Does Canada have the right to exist? But nobody really questions Canada's right to exist. Now, that's just one issue of an enormously complex and potentially explosive issue of the wider Middle East and the circumstances that resulted in the birth of Israel. I'm not saying that just because we acknowledge or accept Israel's existence, that automatically gives anyone the right to oppress anyone else. We should not be blind. In fact, we should be deeply concerned about the plight of the people who were displaced by this. Not just as Palestinians, I would say, but just as human beings, as any other people who have been harmed by the larger forces of history, or have had their situation worsened. The world should, and I would posit the view that the world actually is deeply concerned about the unintended or intended, who knows, victims of the forces that led to Israel's existence. So I think that we ought to actually concern ourselves more with improving the lives, dignity, security, and well-being of the people who have been affected by this than by getting into a political wrangle about it all. Now, the reason why I say that is not that I think that we should disregard the political, but I think that the political in this case is kind of overwhelming all other considerations. First and foremost, we've got to remember that both Israel and the people which we now refer to as Palestine, Israelis and the people we now refer to as Palestinians, are human beings with legitimate concerns, with universal concerns, that I think we would be far more well advised to address, i.e. the issue of safety, security, and dignity, than to get involved in the political of this, because the political inevitably, or seems to inevitably, degenerate into taking sides and trying to figure out who is right and who is wrong here. And that leads us to abstract thinking, which also leads us to sort of undervalue the actual real life effects that the problems arising from that, from the tensions and the political situation in that region have or create for the actual people living there. That's just my take on Israel and its existence or non-existence, and the reason why it should or should not be expected to explain its own existence. And also adamantly and emphatically underlining my position that the position and the day-to-day life of so many people that we would, I suppose, call the Palestinians, or if you will, we just will call them the Palestinians, have to live under every day of their lives. It's a tragedy. And I think that the best way to do it, the best way to rectify the situation, is to remember that they are all humans, even the people that we disagree with. Thank you.